Image Centre. My name is Ben, and this is Aviva, and we'll be hosting this event this evening. Before we begin our talk, we will read the Land Acknowledgement. Toronto is the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We will now speak briefly about the IID.
The International Issues Discussion Series was formed in 2005 by 2 Ryerson students and 2 faculty members, one of whom is Dr. Arne Kislenko of the Department of History. Since its inception, the IID has booked a number of lectures with speakers from around the world. Some of our past lectures include Accommodation or Confrontation, U.S. Policy in Iran, and Democracy in the Age of Trump. We will now pass the stage on to Paul Roth, Director of the Ryerson Image Centre.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Roth. I'm the director of the Ryerson Image Centre, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. We're really happy to be partnering with IID once again. We co-presented a lecture with Susan Meiselas about 1.5 years, 2 years ago now, and it was a great experience. So we're very happy to be welcomed back by IID into their home here. We especially want to thank the students who put on IID each year, and also their supervisor, Arne Kislenko. This is really a great program, and it's wonderful for us to be able to bring the Ryerson Image Center's audience together with IID's long history doing this lecture series. But I do want to tell you a little bit about our lecture series as well. Normally, we do the Tannenbaum Lecture Series as a standalone, not in partnership. We have partnered only with IID, but we really feel that there's a lot in common between our 2 series, and in one particular way, above all, which is the history of the Tannenbaum Lecture Series. The TLS has actually had several names. From 1986 to 2013, it was sponsored by Kodak Canada, and it was known very prominently as the Kodak Lecture Series. Over the years, a huge number, 200 plus photographers, filmmakers, media artists, photo historians, and curators addressed Toronto audiences on the Ryerson campus in different locations. Included among them were people like W. Eugene Smith, Berenice Abbott, Dawood Bey, Stan Brakhage, Robert Frank, Sally Mann, Michael Snow, and John Sarkovsky, among many others. In 2013, when Kodak Canada quietly passed away, the continuation of this acclaimed series, which was Ryerson's primary concern, was made possible by a generous gift from Howard and Carol Tannenbaum. I want to take this opportunity tonight to thank Howard and Carol profoundly for their ongoing generous support for this lecture series and for other programs at the Ryerson Image Centre. It was very important to them that the legacy of bringing these great practitioners and thinkers to campus would continue. So thank you to Howard and Carol. I also want to mention one program note before we begin. After the talk tonight, Jamel will open up the floor for a Q&A. Please note now, though we'll repeat it later, that we will provide a microphone for any audience member that has a question to ask. So please wait for the microphone to come to you before you speak. And that's because we're recording tonight's lecture, and we want to make sure that your voice is heard clearly on the recording. And now, before I read Jamel's bio and welcome him to the stage, I just want to say that for us, inviting Jamel at this time began a few months ago when I was in New York City for an annual event called the Gordon Parks Awards, which is an event honoring the legacy of the great photographer Gordon Parks, who, of course, we are celebrating right now in an exhibition at the Ryerson Image Centre. The exhibition is called The Flavio Story. This is the catalog. The show is up for just under 1 more month. If you haven't seen the show, please come by and see it before December 9th. When I was at the Gordon Parks Awards this year, I saw Jamel Shabazz talk. He was one of the honorees. I, of course, have known his work for many, many years, have been an admirer and a follower of his work. for longer than I care to admit, longer probably than he wants me to say. But I will tell you that I had never heard him speak, and when I heard him talk about Gordon that night, I realized that there really wasn't any other speaker for us to invite during this season. And that is why we extended the invitation, and we're very grateful that Jamel was agreeable to come and do this IID and Tanenbaum Lecture Series tonight. It's now my pleasure to read an introduction, which in no way really describes what Jamel's career has been about. For that, you will have to wait until his talk, which is just a minute or two away. Jamel Shabazz is best known for his iconic images of New York City during the 1980s, though he has been working continuously for far longer than that. He is a documentary, fashion, and street photographer. He's authored 8 monographs of his work, and his photographs have been included in many other books as well. His work has also been exhibited throughout the United States and the world, and is included in the collections of many museums, prominently the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Studio Museum of Harlem, and the Bronx Museum of the Arts, all in New York City. Shabazz is a member of the photography collective Kyon, and he is a 2018 recipient, as I just pointed out, of the Gordon Parks Award. Welcome to the stage, Jamel Shabazz.
Wow. It's truly an honor and privilege to return back to a city that is so close to my heart. Thank you all for coming out. It means so much to me to be back with family again. I'd like to take this opportunity and thank you, Paul, for providing me with this platform to share my vision. Thank you, Natalie Spango, for all your hard work and effort in connecting the dots and bringing me here. And especially thanks to my good brother, Dr. Ken Montague, for all the great work that you've done over the many years. It was you that brought me here back in 2003 and introduced my work to Toronto, a place I'd never been to before. And to me coming here, that short time with the Wedge Gallery, it has allowed me to meet so many wonderful people who I am friends with today. So I'm so humbled that you're here. I appreciate you so much and all the work that you've done as a collector, as a curator, as a doctor, and as a friend. I have to give a shout out to my brother Zun Lee, you know, another friend that I met through my first time coming here in Toronto. My good friend Justin, who I met coming here, Complex, and so many. It just amazes me the wonderful people I've met. And it's like the friendships that I've gained through my first time coming here, I still have those friendships to this very day. So once again, this city is so close to my heart, and it meant so much for me to come back just to say thank you. Because when I started back in 2003, I was still working as a correction officer in the city. I had just experienced the hardships of 9/11 as a first responder, and I was struggling, and I didn't have my balance. But so it was very difficult, and it's ironic that I would come here. I did my first speech here ever, right here in this auditorium, and I was going through a lot of hardships, but I got through it thanks to people like yourself, Ken, and so many others. So once again, it's just an honor to be here. I would have never imagined that photography would bring me to this particular stage in my life. I am a product of the 1960s, and it's so important that I say that, because it's the 1960s that shaped and molded me to be the person which I am. So the first part of my presentation, I call it vision and purpose. Before I start to understand my purpose, the vision was pretty much fed into my mind based off growing up in the 1960s. I was greatly impacted by the war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement. My father was a documentary photographer who photographed in the Navy for 6 years. And he used to always bring home publications, photography magazines. Unbeknownst to my father, I would read these publications and study them. And I was very intrigued with war. You know, it was just something about images of death and destruction that just moved me, like, how is this possible? And no one really ever explained it to me. But I would just look at these publications and watch movies with my father. And during the war in Vietnam, I remember just often watching the 6:30 news with Walter Cronkite. I'm about 6 years old. I'm looking at this war, not only the war in Vietnam, but all these other wars and conflicts that were going on around the world. And my father and I, we never talked about it. So I ingested a lot of this as a young child. And it took me years to really process it. And now I have an opportunity to let a lot of it out. And those of you who follow me on social media, you see that oftentimes I deal with the 1980s, the time period that shaped me, but I got to always rewind back and go back to the 1960s to kind of like help process the war and how it impacted me as a young child. And here I am, 58 years old, and all these wars are still going on. So all my life, all I've known is war. So it's very important that I share that with you. I decided to introduce this lecture, and I want to acknowledge international issue discussion, the students. I want to give a shout out to the students and staff that helped to make this event possible. I don't want to forget you guys. Thank you so much for your hard work and effort in bringing me here and the work that you are doing, because it's through you that we're going to make this world a better place. But I want to start off with this image right here that I took. And when I saw this young child on the bus in 1980, I had just returned home from the military, and I was trying to find my way. And in looking at this young child, it took me back to my childhood as a young, curious child, looking out, trying to understand the world that is going on around me. Again, during the time of Vietnam and civil rights. So I wanted to introduce this image first, and I call it The Observer. This is the time period, 1967, that I started to come of age. I was 6 years old at the time, and again, the war was unfolding, and I'm trying to process it. And it's through publications like Life, National Geographic, French Match magazine, Spiegel magazine. I was seeing all these publications that my father was bringing home, and I'm looking at them. And I learned early on the powerful language of photography. And it just intrigued me, like, what's going on in America? This is a photograph I retook back in the 1990s. I purchased some Life magazines, and I wanted to retrace my life and the things that I saw that influenced me. So I made this image to help tell a story of the things in which I was seeing. Here I have a photograph of a young child about the same age in which I was at the time, laying shot in the street in New Jersey, Joe Bass. And no one ever explained this to me. Even in reading it, I didn't understand that. And I was very confused that here you have a war going on in Vietnam, and you have children being shot down in the street, and you have conflict going on. So it's through Life magazine in which, again, I started to learn not only the powerful language of photography, but I was introduced to a world outside my community. And at the same time, the school in which I went to, no one was addressing the war. No one was addressing civil rights. I went to Catholic school. They focused on religion and the basic studies, but no one talked about war. Even in my conversations, or should I say my research, my father never explained the war in Vietnam to me. So there was never any conversations. And at that time in my life, I couldn't speak that well. I had a slight speech impediment where I stuttered, so I could not really ask questions. So it's through going to the library that I would just research to try to better understand what was happening in my life. And it was something about the year 1968. I'm 8 years old, and it's like all these things are beginning to unfold in America. You know, you have the war in Vietnam is at its high point. You have the Tet offenses in 1968. You have the assassination of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. I'm seeing all this unfold in front of my eyes, and again, no one is saying anything to me. So I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing the power of images and how they help to convey a message. And it's this year, 1968, as we celebrate 50 years of the war and the assassination, a lot of these things start to come to unfold back into my mind again. And one of the things I started to do, really when I came home from the Army, I started to talk to Vietnam veterans about what was it like to be drafted and go to Vietnam in 1968. I remember so many men from my community going to and from war, even some men who never returned. And what really hit home when a young man in my community, 20 years old, Sam White, got killed in Vietnam. I'll never forget, it was a summer day in 1967, and we were all playing. And all of a sudden, 2 military personnel came, a chaplain and a sergeant, to notify a woman that her only son had died in Vietnam. And it's at that point that the war really hit home, and it touched my heart, and it made me want to know, who was Sam White? Sam White, and why did he die in Vietnam? And just recently, I went to the Vietnam Memorial, and I found his name and did a short documentary to remember this young man who died at 20 years old. Again, the first casualty of the war. And throughout the past 30 years, I've been speaking to Vietnam veterans, particularly black veterans, to try to understand the scope of the war and what was it like to be drafted in the 1960s and go to a war during the time in which Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I was intrigued with that. And I wanted to know more about who were the Viet Cong, who were the North Vietnamese, why were they fighting? And as I dug deep in my research, I started to learn about Algeria. and the wars that were going on there. I started to learn about the wars, Vietnam's war with the Japanese. And it just bothered me with all the wars and hatred going on. And I just have to pause for a minute. I'm going a little bit too fast because this is such a complex conversation for me. It's this photograph that really devastated. I say to this day, it's one of the strongest images I've ever seen in my entire life. Those that understand what's happened here, it's phenomenal. This is seconds before everyone in this photograph was killed by American soldiers during the war. It's the My Lai massacre. Over 500 innocent men, women, and children were killed by American soldiers. It's something about this photograph back in the days that really hit home to me. And I'm saying to myself, why isn't this conversation being discussed in my Catholic school? You know, no one is talking about this. And to me, it was wrong. And in my research, I was finding out they were communists. It's like, all right, they communists, but why does it have to happen? You know, what's going on here? So I felt it's very important that I don't forget these people. So in my presentations, I make it a point to always bring up Vietnam, to always show this image, because I can't imagine the horror in which these people faced before they were brutally murdered. You know, you see the young women on the far right fixing her clothes, so apparently she was raped. There's a book that I read called 4 Hours in Melee that really gets down into what happened during that dreadful day, in Vietnam. So I'm very troubled behind the war to this very day, because as a young child, I was traumatized behind the images in which I saw, and they really affected me throughout my life, and I wanted to just dig for answers. And then this issue came out. I'm still a young child searching, and this Life magazine, it really gave me life as I'm searching for just information. I fell in love with the library. You know, I've lost interest in school very early on because, again, this Catholic school system wasn't teaching me anything other than, like, really forcing religion on me. So when I would leave school, I would go to the local library, and this Life magazine that just captivated me. Life and National Geographic and encyclopedias became my personal books of study. It was something about this issue I remember so vividly, going to the barbershop with my father and thumbing through the pages. This is just one section of the 242 American soldier servicemen that died in 1 week in Vietnam. 242. And I'm looking at all of these individual photographs that represent American servicemen throughout America. And again, I'm trying to understand what's going on here. So if you have a week, if 242 American soldiers died in Vietnam, how many North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese soldiers died as well? It's through this book, Don McCullough, I started to better understand not only Vietnam, but other conflicts that were going on around the world at the same time. I was drawn. My father had photographs of Don McCullough. Before this book actually came out, I was looking at photographs that he had in photography books. So I was introduced early on to his photographs before the book actually came out. But I learned in this book here the hardships and ugliness of war and violence, and what it looked like up close and personal. And again, I'm intrigued with these images here, trying to understand what's going on here. What is the Viet Cong? What is the North Vietnamese soldier? What are they fighting for? And what happened here, as I started to look at these photographs, I want to see the other side. So recently, I started to go on YouTube and research or dramas. We've seen Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill. I want to see the other side. I want to see who are the North Vietnamese people and how they living and why are they fighting. And I was amazed on YouTube, all these phenomenal dramas that show their struggle. You know, they died, they were hungry, they suffered from malaria. When they saw their children, loved ones murdered, they were upset behind that. They endured the bombings and hardships. And I developed an appreciation for them. And I'm like, you know, why are these wars necessary? And in that same book, there was another conflict going on that started to intrigue me. And this is the conflict in Northern Ireland. And you have the Protestants against the Catholics. And again, I'm going to Catholic school, and no one is talking about this here. So I'm gaining a whole new education just looking at photography books and learning, again, the universal language of photography. This is the war in Biafra in the same book. So as a young child, I'm 8, 9 years old, taking all of this in and not being able to process it and talk to anyone, just trying to understand it on my own accord. My father had no idea that I was studying his photography books. I'm seeing hunger for the first time. Another subscription my father had, it was to Playboy Magazine. I speak about this often, and a lot of people don't really understand it. while a lot of my peers were reading comic books, I was drawing the Playboy Magazine. And I can honestly say at 8, 9, 10 years old, I wasn't really looking at the photograph, but subconsciously maybe I was, because as time would go on, I understood light and composition and beauty. But I was most intrigued with the interviews in Playboy Magazine as a young child, because I wasn't learning certain things in school. So it's in Playboy Magazine I was introduced to Malcolm X for the first time. Malcolm X and Alex Haley, because Alex Haley was the journalist that interviewed Malcolm X, and I'm reading it for the very first time in my life, and I'm learning about Malcolm X and Alex Haley. I learned about Fidel Castro. I learned about Norman Lincoln Rockwell, the leader of the American Nazi Party. I'm learning about John Wayne and everyone else in between, basically from reading Playboy Magazine. It was something about that publication that intrigued me with these interviews. And I just wanted to know more about just how the world was. And it was something about, and I would learn later on that Playboy had some of the best writers in the world. And it gave me so much information to this very day. It's in Playboy that I saw the map of Vietnam for the very first time. And of course, the picture that would change the world by Eddie Adams. Again, I'm taking all this in as a young child. So I felt the need to share these images because these are the photographs that allowed me to see the power of photography. And it helped to shape my vision and my appreciation for the craft. And to this day, I have so much respect for war photographers. Just last week, I was with a noted war photographer, Mike Canvas, who runs a center in New York City called the Bronx Documentary Center. And Mike is a dedicated teacher who's seen the hardships of war, who's lost friends in Libya and throughout in different war zones. And he's compassionate to teaching documentary photography to young people in hopes that that skill will help to end some of the wars that we are seeing. I remember so vividly the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Again, this happened for me, I remember the TV, I was watching Lost in Space, and it was a special bulletin came on that Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And I'm watching this here, and again, no one is talking to me about it. I'm just processing it, and no one in my family ever took me to the side and explained what was going on in America at this time. And then I discovered Black and White America by Leonard Freed. My father, for some reason, treasured this book. It was on our coffee table, it was signed. And it was something about this book that spoke to me as a young child. That's the original cover, and this is the new cover here. And when I saw this cover, I said, that's it right there. That child represents me. This book was tailor-made for me to help me have a better understanding in terms of what is it like to be Black in America. To me, this became my study guide. It gave me so much information on a wide range of subjects, from photography, psychology, sociology, and Black and white photography. And what's so amazing about my experience with Leonard Freed, I never met him, but later on I would meet his wife, Bridget, and her and I will become very good friends to this very day, where we communicate with each other, and she passed on this photograph to me. So it's amazing how life would come full circle, how I never met the man, I was impacted by him. She was by his side when he took so many of his photographs, and now this woman, 84 years old, is a good friend of mine who calls me up on the phone to see how I'm doing, and she appreciates the fact that her husband planted a seed in me that has grown into helping me be the man I am to this very day. So it's in this photograph book I saw myself for the first time. I grew up in South Brooklyn, Red Hook Projects. So when I saw these images, they spoke to me because I saw myself. I saw my peers. Despite the fact it was Harlem, I saw images for the first time that represented me. And at the same time, I'm seeing photographs that are saying things. I'm beginning to understand the deeper meaning of photographs and injustice. I'm seeing brutality and protest. I'm seeing signs of discrimination I've never seen before. And then I'm learning a new language. I remember so vividly having the book and then having to get the dictionary to understand some of the words I'm seeing for the very first time in my life. I had never heard of rape before. But in reading this book, I saw the word rape. I saw the word lynching. I heard I saw the word nigger for the very first time. So I needed the dictionary to dissect what was going on to better understand what was happening. And mind you, at this time, I'm about 8, 9 years old, trying to process this here. My father had no idea that I was reading this book every single day. And as time would go on, I would be greatly influenced by music. Back in the 1960s, for those that know, there was a lot of music that would protest. So it's that music from that time period to help me understand. So as I'm looking at the Life magazine to try to understand what's going on in Vietnam and what's going on in America, Ball of Confusion is playing by the Temptations. Crystal Blue Persuasion is playing. So I'm listening to a lot of this protest music. I'm looking at the images. And it's feeding my mind. At the same time, I'm seeing another side of photography. I'm seeing music photography. And I'm seeing the beauty of photography through album covers and art. Not only photography, but art itself. So I fell in love with album covers. And in a sense, it's the album covers, the images from the album covers that taught me how to pose my subjects. But I decided to post this particular series of photographs because I was greatly shaped by Philadelphia International Records under the leadership of Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. It was something about that record company that really spoke to my soul and helped me to better understand my particular path in life. You know, with Kenny Gamble, on every album cover, he would leave a message. He would write a statement, a short essay about what was going on in the world. And I would copy them and just put them to the side. I would handwrite them and put them to the side because it was so profound. But music played a great role in my understanding my journey in life. And I'll say from Gil Scott-Heron, Marvin Gaye. When I think of Marvin Gaye, his What's Going On album, it really resonates with me on so many different levels. It helped to give me a sense of perspective as I was getting a little older in life. And I got to speak about this series here, Kung Fu. So now it's beginning to make a little bit more sense to me at this point. You know, I'm seeing what's going on in Vietnam. I'm reading all these publications. And now I realize that I'm on a particular path in life. So when the Kung Fu series came on in the 1970s, I'm becoming a teenager, and now I'm beginning to understand that I'm on this path for a reason. I'm going through these different hardships and this training to prepare me for a higher calling in life. And for those you guys who know about the series, it was an incredible series. It came on in the 1970s. It inspired a lot of us who wanted to learn the martial arts, but it motivated me to want to study Asian philosophy, Eastern philosophy, should I say, to understand Confucianism and the Shaolin monks and why they live in the way in which they do. And it taught me humility. And again, it helped me to understand that I'm on a particular path in life, and I got to go through different hardships in order to come into manhood. So I owe so much of my life and my understanding of the path through this series right here. And I have to say, another one that came on to make me look at life a little bit differently was Planet of the Apes. It was something about Planet of the Apes that just kind of like stuck with me. It's like, whoa, this is a little bit deep. This is kind of deep right here. And to this day, I look at the original version of Planet Apes, and there was something about it that made me just look at life a little bit. And I said, there's a relationship between Planet Apes and what's going on in America, especially when you look at skin complexion. And this photograph really represents, this is my community right here when I moved out to Flatbush. And this is the intersection between Flatbush and Church Avenue, one of the most walked areas of my journey. So this really started my actual path. So many of the photographs I made over the many years were shot within this particular location right here. Before I go back to that, so go back into some of my journey. I'm going a little fast right here. So I had a mother and father. My father was a photographer. My mother was a nurse. They were married for 20 years. And at a very critical stage in my life, they divorced. And when they divorced, the family was separated, and we went through some very difficult times. I lived with my mother, with my sister and my brother, and I felt I was being a burden to my mother. So I no longer want to do that, or be that, should I say. So I decided to join the military against my father's wishes. My father had suffered, something happened to him during his time in the Navy. I don't quite know what it was, but he didn't want me to go into the military. He resisted it. But I was 16 years old, and I didn't want to go to school anymore. I became very frustrated. So I decided to join the military. I figured, let me take a shortcut, go into the armed forces. I could get my high school diploma, go to college, and see some of the world. So at 16 years old, I made that decision with my friend. Once I turned 17, I went into the armed forces. I was stationed in Germany for 3 years, which was one of the most important periods of my life because it helped to really shape me and give me a great sense of direction. I'm 17 years old, and even before Germany, let me just rewind a little bit. I went in 1977. The war had just ended by 2 years. So a lot of my instructors were Vietnam veterans. And it's there in AIT, Fort Benning, Georgia, where I was an infantryman, that I started to learn more about the Vietnam War. Now I'm learning it firsthand from soldiers that fought in Vietnam. And I'm learning things that really trouble me. And now more answers are beginning to come into my mind. And I remember the cadence that we used to sing. And it troubled me. My drill sergeant was about 6'8". He was in Vietnam, he was gung-ho, and he would sing this cadence when we would run every morning. And it really bothered me. And he would say it with a smile on his face. And it was, we're going to rape, kill, pillage, and burn. We're going to rape, kill, pillage, and burn. And that helped me to understand that this war was really deep. And now I'm beginning to see firsthand some of the men that fought in it. And I was opposed to it. Despite the fact that I'm in the Army now, I realized that this isn't really for me. Now I understand why my father didn't want me to serve. But nevertheless, I would finish AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, and go on to Germany. And Germany was very interesting for me because in my research, I had studied Nazi Germany back in the 1930s and the 1940s. So I was kind of eager to go to understand what happened during that time period. And I was amazed in being in Germany that I started to see it for the first time. I understood what Hitler was doing in terms of the creation of a master race, and now I'm seeing it full force in some of the people in which he created in terms of the size and shapes of a lot of the men and women. So I saw it firsthand, and it further intrigued me to do deeper research. So when I was in Germany, one of the first places I discovered to give me a sense of peace was a library. And I would spend a lot of my time in the library when I was in the field, continuing to study Life magazine, Time, and all the publications I can get my hands on. I would spend 3 years in Germany, and it's there that at that point, I started to develop an interest in photography. It wasn't really full force, but I was shooting early on. But in Germany, I started to see the power of photography. And as I got short, I decided I was going to, short is when you're about to come home. I promised myself when I returned back to the streets, I would never be without memories. So I'm going a little fast. I kind of like skipped over some of my early years growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s, but I can get back to that later on. But it's such a complex story. I don't want to take too much of your time because it's so much. It's so extensive. But this represents, in a sense, me coming home back in the summer of 1980. I experienced being in Germany, which really helped me to grow and develop. I went in 17. I came out at 20. I had a greater focus on life. One of the things I have to say about my experience in Germany that really exposed me to a world outside my community, the beautiful thing about the Army is that you connect with people all over the country. You got people from the North, you got people from the South. The unfortunate part about it, we were divided. And that troubled me so much that we couldn't get together. I was young and I was immature, and I didn't understand the importance of using that opportunity to come together as a community. Because in one unit, you got people from everywhere. But we are divided, and we never really had the chance to communicate with each other. So when my time was up, I returned back to New York during the summer of 1980. And here I'm leaving Germany. I'm returning to a war zone. I'm returning to my neighborhood, and it seems like everything just went upside down. A lot of young men, they were losing their lives. And now I felt I had to do something. I came home with a Canon AE1 that I purchased from the PX. And I came home with a vision now to want to make a change in my community. I lived with my father, who was a photographer, who saw me with my camera, and I'm going fast. Let me just slow down a little bit. Wow, it's so much. Let me just pause because I'm speaking. I got to learn how to slow down just a little bit because it's such a, all right, okay. Because it's a very, very complex story here. But when I came home to a total change in time. A lot of friends had become enemies. A lot of my friends were losing their young brothers to violence over nonsense. And I'm seeing a lot of this here. For those of you guys who've seen my photographs over the years, you see I have a lot of young people. A lot of those photographs were taken at local high schools in the community. It's two of them that I would visit. So when I came home and I'm hearing about all these deaths, even when I was in Germany, I was hearing about a lot of young men dying when I was in the service. So I came home a changed man with a desire to want to bring about change in my community. And that's when Marvin Gaye's music really resonated with me. He has a song called What's Happening, Brother? And when I think about that song, to this day I break down and I cry because that song reminds me of what I was feeling when I first came home. I wanted to know what was happening, what was going on, why was so many people dying and killing each other. And I started to realize I knew both the victim and the victors. So the camera became my microphone. It became my compass that guided me on a very unique path that I didn't expect I was going to be on. I realized now that I needed to talk to young people. And I just couldn't approach them and just ask them what's going on. But there was something magical about having a camera and approaching them and saying that I see something in you, brother. With all due respect, when I take a photograph of you, it started a conversation with me and a lot of my subjects. So I used my camera and my voice to talk to young people in my community about what was going on in the street. And to my surprise, a lot of people opened up to me, and they let me photograph them, and I started to mentor a lot of them. I spoke about the importance of keeping your body clean, going to school, One of the gifts I learned when I was in Germany, I learned how to play chess. So for me, chess is a very important element to help young people understand decision-making, conflict resolution. So I would walk with my Canon AE1 and with my chessboard, and whenever I saw young people, I would sit them down and engage them in conversation. I learned to Jewel that you replace a bad habit with a good habit. So they put down the dice and picked up the chessboard, put down the alcohol, and I introduced them to the orange juice. So I would oftentimes take a lot of young men to the local park and just teach them how to play chess and introduce them to the music I brought home from Germany too. Because one of the beautiful things about being in the service, I was introduced to music from all over the country. I came home with a large jazz collection, reggae collection. I had a nice stereo system I brought home, because back in the days, what the computer is to this generation is what stereo equipment was to us back in that day and time. So I had my reel-to-reel, I had my Bose speakers, I had a nice little system going on. I would bring a lot of the young guys into my home, and sisters. I had a lot of friends, because I was a big brother to a lot of people, and I would introduce them to music. And not only jazz, but a lot of love songs. And I was known for to be that type of person. And I knew almost everybody. Down this particular avenue, it was a stretch. And what was so interesting about it, as my books came out, there were so many enemies. So I would walk through the 30s. The 30s section had beef with the 40s. The 50s had beef with the 90s. But as a photographer, I had a respect by everybody. And I'm photographing all of these people, and I'm gaining respect for them. And I'm telling them, look, I just came home from the military. I want to know what's going on. And whatever reason, a lot of these young people took to me, and they stood in front of my camera. And then I realized that something bad was happening, because I got to go back to Germany for a minute. One of the things in which I saw in Germany that really troubled me was that we had a heroin epidemic that no one really talks about that. I really believe at that time that the Russians were putting heroin on the American bases. So when I got there, a lot of servicemen were ODing on heroin. Luckily for me, I had a good friend that didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he stayed in the library, he was a photographer. So he guided me on the right path. But a lot of young men didn't make it over there. That's the untold story that people really don't know about, the drug epidemic in the military back in the 70s. So I came home a clean, decent person, and I wanted to make a difference in my community. I was introduced to the black arts movement, so I understood there was a power in art. And I came home with a desire to try to heal my community. But there was something going on that was coming, and then it would be the crack epidemic. And around the same time, when crack was slowly introduced to the community, I watched how it started to just devastate a lot of people I once knew. And not only did crack come, but it seemed like crack came and AIDS came almost at the same time. And now a whole generation is at risk. So I realized now that I have to use my voice as an elder to engage people. And again, the camera became the tool in which I used to talk to young people to warn them of the time. It might appear self-righteous, but I just had a sincere concern for my community. I would walk around and speak about the importance of health and nutrition and exercise. And it seems crazy at this time, but so many people call me, email me now and say, thank you, it's because of you that I changed my life. My father was a chain smoker. A lot of my uncles died prematurely from bad diets and cancer. So I had a personal issue with that. So a lot of times when I would go up to a lot of the local high schools, I would engage young people about smoking and drinking. And I would try to combat it. I would try to engage them and say, you got to give that up. And again, replace the bad habit with a good habit. So I came on a level like that. I was paying behind pollution. So I talked about the importance of keeping our neighborhoods clean. So the camera, again, was my compass that guided me and engaged me. It allowed me to engage people, because I would take their photographs, and I would go to 1 hour photo, and I would oftentimes go back up to the school and give people the photograph. But it wasn't about the photograph, the photography for me. What was more important for me was being in a position to talk to young people, to kind of like be a guide for them. One of the books that inspired me early on in my life was the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And what I got out of that book that really touched me was the fact that Malcolm would go into the drug houses. He would go in the street corners, and he would try to clean people up. I wanted to be that type of person. I want to make a difference in my community. I'm 21 years old now. One of the things that happens when a lot of men come home from the service, especially in New York, the eastern area, we were taught, my father told me to apply for civil service jobs, because civil service will allow you a foundation. And with your military benefits, you can continue to go to school. So I applied for a number of city jobs, and one of the first jobs they called me was the New York City Correction Department. I'm 23 years old, and I decided that this was a path that I needed to be on. This is an assignment that I need to go on, because I need to go into the jail system and see what's happening, see what type of difference I can make. I've seen young men that I grew up with who were falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit, spend time in prison and come home. So I realized that I need to go inside there and see what type of difference I can make. So in 1983, at the age of 23 years old, the same time the crack epidemic hit, I became a correction officer, working on Rikers Island, one of the largest jails in the country. And it was a cultural shock for me because I had never seen prison before. Other than looking at the photographs in Leonard Freed's book of Angola State Prison, I've read about it, I saw the hardships of it, but when I went on Rikers Island, I was not prepared for what I saw. So many young men and women incarcerated, many who have fallen victim to drug addiction, and they needed rehabilitation versus addiction. And it pained me so much to see men from my community had fallen victim. So I used my advocacy inside the jail system to try to engage young people to help guide them. The administration didn't really care for what I was doing because it was about making money. And as far as they were concerned, they were mutts, they were animals. But for me, these were young men and women from my community. It's like, how could you treat them indifferent? Because eventually they're going to come home. But I would spend 20 years working in the correction department, and I carried my camera everywhere I went. I documented inside the jail system, trying to make a difference. I would bring a lot of the photographs I took from the streets into the jail, and I would try to encourage people to give them guidance, to show them hope and possibility. And it was a really deep situation for me because even inside the jail, I came upon a situation where I was showing photographs to an individual who I was mentoring, and I happened to tell him that this young man in this photograph got murdered, senselessly, and come to find out the person I was showing the picture with was the one who took his life. So I was having encounters like that. It was a very horrible situation to be in. I went into a negative atmosphere every day. Love and hate. It was warfare. In order to maintain my balance, I had to read The Art of War and The Art of Peace because of the very hostile environment. But that crack changed everything. When crack came, the music changed, the attitude changed, the people changed. It's one of the worst things that happened. In my conversations with women, and this photograph here, I have to say, it was taken by Eugene Richards, who actually went back into my community in Red Hook and photographed these women here that I grew up with. And normally I break down and I cry when I show this photograph, but I've gotten over it. I can no longer cry. I've got all the pain out of me, but it was very devastating because what I learned from a woman who fell victim to crack, she said to me, what crack did, it made slaves out of women and freaks out of men because women sold their souls sexually. During my travels, I became pretty much a concerned photographer. I was troubled by the things I was seeing, the homelessness and the despair. And I would document it. My father wasn't in agreement with this here. He did not understand why I would waste my time photographing these conditions, but I couldn't understand that. We live in the richest country in the world, but why do you have people living in these conditions here? So some of my earlier photographs, I documented homelessness. And this is a context sheet of pretty much my process of documenting young people. And I felt it was necessary to show this right here because it shows you, my typical day of just traveling throughout my community, with my Canon AE1 Kodak film. Pretty much all I had was a roll of 136. I had to make sure every shot count. And this just represents a typical day. It's starting, you got the high school there, picture the Ken, there you have that photograph Ken. I love the trains because for me, the trains during the cold weather and the rain allowed me a sense of shelter. So if it was raining and cold outside, I'd get on the train and just ride the trains from point A to point B, walking car to car, looking for people to photograph and engage in conversation. Because it really, it wasn't truly about the photograph. It was about me trying to engage people in conversation about what's going on in life. What are your plans? What are your goals and aspirations? I want to be that big brother. And one of the joys of shooting black and white back then, an enemy who became a friend gave me an enlarger, and I started doing my own development. And my father taught me, that's when him and I really got close, because I converted my old laundry room into a dark room, and I would spend hours. I would turn on some jazz music. I'd go in at 12 o'clock in the morning and leave 8 o'clock and just develop in the dark room. And I loved that whole process of creating. So it helped me to see photography in a whole different light. I saw it in a sense of like being an alchemist. I continue to want to document the hardships the other side. I saw the beauty up at the high schools, the students, but as I'm traveling, I'm seeing alcoholism, drug addiction, and I felt the need to turn my lens to it. This is some of my earlier work from 1980, and this is the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the Bowery. And I was just very troubled behind that. I always want to know, who are these men? Were they in war? What created this situation that allowed them to fall victim to alcoholism? What's being done to help them? Around the same time, I started to document prostitution. And it's very painful to me. Again, I go back to the Autobiography of Malcolm X. and how Malcolm was known for one who was able to change the life of a prostitute. And, you know, this really bothered me right here, to see so many young women selling their bodies out there. And it was very hard for me to shoot, but I felt it was necessary for me to go out there and document this here. This particular photograph is one I never talk about, and I really, very rarely do I ever show it. I shared my voice in a documentary called Everybody's Street about street photography, and I speak about a situation where I came upon a young prostitute propositioning a John. And when I approached her, matter of fact, I was walking across the street and she was engaging in very much like the previous photograph, and I took the shot and she screamed and she says, "I got something for you." And she went, and so ironic that that prostitute is the woman to my left, to my right, excuse me, and the young man that she called was the one in the middle. And that young man, on that same day, he came with about maybe 5 guys, and they surrounded me and my partner with the attempt to do bodily harm to me and my associate. And I got into a strong defensive position, and I said, before we go to war, let me just say something to you. And I told him that I am someone who's trying to do good out here, and I meant no disrespect in photographing your woman. And he said to me, this young man right here on the same day, he says, "I like you." He says, from this point on, I'm giving you permission to come out here at any given point to document this world. So on this day, the negative is phenomenal, because the negative shows the sequence of events that led to this photograph right here. And I call this image bittersweet. A lot of people see it on my Instagram feed and they like it, they acknowledge it, but for me it's painful, because you have a man who's a pimp, and you have 2 women that were selling themselves out there and actually photographed them selling themselves, and you have a young innocent boy with a cat. And the gentleman is holding, he's biting, he's tapping, he's touching the young boy. So is it his son? I can't even explain it. It's such a very painful photograph. Could that be his mother? But he's out there as these women are selling themselves. And again, just 10 minutes earlier, you know, those women were selling themselves on the street, but I was able to photograph them and engage them in conversation. But the best thing that came out of it, the pimp gave me permission to come out there and document. So I would spend many years of my life going out there, not only photographing these prostitutes, but engaging them in conversation, getting them off the streets. To this day, I have a close friendship with 2. And I was able to get a whole lot of them off there because they needed someone to give them a sense of guidance. And there's something, the new HBO series called The Deuce just takes me back to that moment in my life and my experience dealing with them. Now we get into the 80s, a whole nother side of my photography. You know, a change in time. You know, oftentimes my work is considered the birth of hip-hop, the early stages. And it was a really good time. This photograph represents, you know, to me, love. Back in the old days, if a woman and man really loved each other, they would dress identical. So this is very common during the early 80s, you know, and this is just, to me, it just represents love. And this is part of a series I created called The Other Side. And with the other side, rather than photograph people from the front, I photographed them from the back. So I would ride the trains just looking for a little bit of anybody and everybody. You know, young people, police officers, just life on the trains. As you know, you guys who've been in New York, you know how the train system is. It's never a dull moment. And what's interesting about this photograph, too, beyond the couple, is the graffiti tags that you see. As time would go on, I would show images like this here, and I have somebody approach me and say, "Man, you got a picture of my cousin and my brother." I said, "Your cousin and your brother? You saw the couple?" "No, that's my cousin on the right, the graffiti, and that's my cousin on the left, ties." And I had no idea at the time the impact that my work had in regards to graffiti. So it was very interesting. This is a very important photograph of mine. This is a young brother I tried to save when I came home from the Army. A very interesting man. His mother was an airline stewardess. His father was a police detective. I grew up with his brother and his sister. We were very close friends. He was friends with my brother. He was one of the first brothers, young men to get murdered in my community. And what's interesting about this photograph, and it shows you the power of images, the young woman behind him is his girlfriend, and she's pregnant at the time. He got murdered shortly after this photograph by the police in the precinct. How ironic, his father's a police officer, he gets killed by the police. And his daughter reached out to me about a year and a half ago on Instagram saying, "I need to have a picture of my father. I need to have this photograph of my father. Because in this photograph, I never met my father, but my mother was pregnant at the time." That helped me to see how powerful my images are and what they mean to this newer generation. And I'm getting constant messages today from people all over New York City ask me about photographs of their mothers and fathers because they know I got them. They're searching for clues, and oftentimes their parents are not here. But knowing that I documented that time period, they feel that I hold a piece of a puzzle of the lives of their parents. This picture is very important to me because it represents my relationship to a lot of young men and women in the street. I like this so much, I want it to be the cover of my book, Pieces of a Man. But what this represents is me sharing my portfolio with young men in my travels. I had three things with me. I had my camera, my chessboard, and my portfolio. And on a good day, I might have me a quart of orange juice. But in this particular day, this rainy day in Brooklyn, you know, I have my portfolio, and this would be my way of communicating with young people. A lot of them had never really been to art galleries before. They had never really had an interest in photography, never really saw themselves. So a lot of the images in which I would make, I would get them done in 8x10 format, and I would have a nice portfolio consisting of about maybe 25 8x10s. And I would carry my work and I would share them with young people to have a language, engage, should I say, have a conversation. So this picture means so much to me because it represents that moment so well. And the young man, you know, to my left, he passed away. So now it's a really powerful memory. And what's ironic, too, the young man on my right, he was with me with the situation with the prostitute. So he was a young man I was mentoring. So that day we were surrounded, I told him to go back to back with me as we were about to fight the pimps. Yes. That's good, I needed that pause. So this picture is very powerful because I was known for one that posed a lot of images, but this is just a natural image of just an intimate moment between two young men looking at a portfolio. And these were the type of young men I was trying to say, because I said, I need your help. You guys can make a difference out here. I can't do this by myself. There's a lot of young people dying out here. So many are falling victim to drugs. Because what was happening when the crack epidemic hit, it was a lure for a lot of young people to want to become drug dealers. You know, it was this illusion. What was interesting, too, when crack hit, Scarface came out. And the reverse happened. The idea with Scarface was to produce an anti-drug movie. Instead, it stimulated young people to say, we can do this, but we won't get caught. And working in Rikers Island, what surprised me, the administration played Scarface every single day. I could never understand that. And it was the only way to keep the inmate population quiet. We had a day room area, and they would play it every single day, and it bothered me. And a lot of men, they took that in, and when they got out, they would go ahead and they would fall victim to that drug game. This is one of my most popular photographs right here, and it represents another group that I was targeting, the young. Because these young boys were coming up. They were seeing the older guys. They wanted to be like them. I call this young boys. And I would see them and engage them in conversation and just talking about being careful because it's a very dangerous world out there, and we can't lose you. You know, and sadly, you know, one went on to be a famous rapper, AZ, to my left. You know, and that's him at his prime. They're about 12, 13 years old. But the three other ones, they suffered very difficult lives, you know, shot, stabbed, and everything. And it really hurt me because in seeing them this day, I kind of felt for them because they were on a very uncertain path. And I just felt the need to engage them and create this pose and have fun with them for a moment, but at the same time plant a seed of hope and possibility. I was blessed to go to the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington. So this is 1983, Washington, D.C. And I learned a lot about Martin Luther King. You know, I've developed a great love for him because when we came up early on, we, as young people, we could not really accept his philosophy of turn the other cheek. We were young and we were kind of hard. We just didn't believe in that. But as time would go on, really this year alone, his 50th anniversary, I spent a lot of time listening to speeches by Martin Luther King. And it helped to really change me as a man. I felt he was very passionate about trying to bring peace in his world, especially when it came down to Vietnam. You know, his speeches were unbelievable about the war. And I developed a great love for Martin Luther King like never before in my life. So this photograph now is like one of my most important images. And I call it Remembering King, Remembering the King. This is an image that, again, it represents, like I think about the Flavio exhibition with Gordon Parks and how Gordon saw this young man and he saw his pain and suffering. He wanted to make a difference in his life. This picture here is a young man that I met at the train station. I'm about to get on the train and I'm on one side, he's on the other side. And whatever reason, he was drawn towards me. And it was just something special about this young kid. Almost, I call this picture back in the days, Help Me. It's like he was reaching out for help. You know, and he was trapped in between two worlds. Here, you know, you have these innocent eyes in the background. You have his friend's horse playing. But it's like he didn't want that part of the world. He wanted something more. And I could tell by the way that he was dressed, he was poor. And it really troubled me that I didn't spend more time with him. And it is my hope that maybe one day he will see this photograph that's in my book, and he will come to me now probably as a 40-year-old man, talking to me and saying, you took my photograph. But I always wonder what happened to this young boy here. And this photograph alone reminded me that I have to take my time and engage more young people in conversation. I cannot let any of them go. And sadly, when I worked in the jail, I've seen this expression so many times, but it became too overwhelming to me working on Rikers Island because there were so many people I would meet on the bars just like this here. And I tried to save them all, but it was just so many. It's like being on a sinking ship, and everyone is saying, help me, help me, help me. And there's only so much that I can do. You know, I love traveling the buses and just talking to people. You know, again, having the camera, for me, it was about having a conversation, asking permission. It was this big debate about, do you ask permission to just take a person's picture? I just can't take a person's picture. It's just something that doesn't feel right with me. I tried to do that before, and I don't like the energy that it created. It's something special when you take a moment and you introduce yourself and you help people understand what it is you're trying to do. And this picture really represents that. If I just took it without the permission, it would be a totally different energy. But when you ask, it produces a certain type of vibration. And in my asking, I speak about the importance of freezing time and how this photograph is going to mean something later on in life. So do trust me, because I'm going to do my very best to preserve your legacy. That's not for fun, but it's about preserving the history. Again, young guys on the train, and I look for them. I would ride the trains in New York, go to car, looking for young people to engage in conversation with. I might have extra books for me to pass on to encourage them to read. You know, I try to create poses that inspired friendship. I spoke about the importance of handshakes and not having dirty looks, but just being at ease and at peace, because I was concerned about them, because at the same time I'm working in the jail, you know, I'm leaving the jail and going in the streets, and I'm talking to young people about who I am. I'm telling them, look, I just left jail. That's not the place to be. So I use my position as an officer to have conversations with young people in hopes that they would stay away from jail. And I would often tell them the only way to go to jail is as an officer, but you don't want to go as an inmate because you will be broken down. Jail is designed to destroy you. It's not designed to rehabilitate you. It's a very violent, negative atmosphere. And sadly, so many of these young men will fall victim to that, oftentimes thinking it was a rite of passage. His faces, again, it reminds me of Flavio. All these young men that you see, they're going through struggle. The innocence of children. I don't do it today, but back in the old days, I took great joy in photographing children because it gave me, to me, it represented hope and joy and innocence. These are some of the young men, again, I used to try to engage in the street. And it was very interesting, the young man, the one with the ball, he got murdered. The young man to my far right, you know, he went on to be a police officer, a retired detective. But it was just seeing the young on the street corners, just having conversations with them. Again, chess, very important photographs. You know, strategy, conflict resolution, decision-making, sacrifice. Very important photograph. As I continue my research in Vietnam, I would often see young men around this particular time, 1988, and when I would see them, I would say, you know, out of curiosity, I would not know if they were in Vietnam, but I would ask them the question, where were you at in 1968? And on this particular day, I saw this young man here, Teddy, on the Lower East Side, and he was highly intoxicated. And I was on the phone, and he approached me. He just stood there by me, just looking at me. And I hung up the phone, and I asked him the question, where was you in 1968? And he went in his wallet, and he pulled out a document in the military terms. It's called the DD Form 214, and he handed it to me. And that document indicated he was a Marine in Vietnam in 1968 and 1969. And his platoon was pretty much annihilated in Vietnam, and he's one of the sole survivors. And what he did, too, he invited me to his home that same day. And he was highly intoxicated. He says, I want you to come to my apartment. He says, I just want you to buy me a beer first. So I bought him a beer, and we went to his apartment, and we sat in his living room, and he brought out a big photo album. And I was amazed. The first photographs is a young child with his mother and his little brother. As I flipped the pages, I saw a young kid, him, playing high school football. And I saw another photograph of him playing college football. Then the next picture, he was a Marine in Vietnam. So this is a young man that had a really promising future prior to going to Vietnam, and the war tore him apart. He was a part of a unit called the Walking Dead that saw a lot of casualties in Vietnam. And what was very interesting about my experience with him that day, his mother came home that day. She came home. I'll never forget. She came in, and she opened up the door, and she was stunned to see me in her living room and seeing her son in such a calm, pleasant state. He's very relaxed. He's very reflective, despite the fact he was intoxicated. But it was a change that she saw. It seemed like I gave her a sense of hope that finally somebody got a chance to talk to him, because he was really bad off. But this particular photograph, at this moment, I was about to leave him. So and he wasn't a man for a whole lot of words, other than showing me his form and his photographs. But as I left him, you know, he called me out. He just gave me that salute there. And what's interesting about Vietnam for me is I came here. I want to understand why so many Americans came to Canada during the war in Vietnam. And I came upon a number earlier this morning, and it was over 125,000 Americans came to Canada during 1968 and 1970. And I was really blown away behind that number. 125,000 came to avoid the war. And I thought that was really interesting. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to come to this city, in hopes that one day I could meet those men, because that's pretty courageous to say, look, we're not going to fight. I'm not going to fight in that war. I'm in total disagreement. I'm not going to Vietnam. So they came to Canada. And then under the Carter administration in 1977, Jimmy Carter, the president, he gave them amnesty, and half of them were returned back to the United States. So I was always very intrigued with the war. You know, and like I said, it stays with me because it scarred me early on in my life. And I want to know about Vietnam. And next year marks the 50th anniversary of the death of Ho Chi Minh. So I hope to go to Vietnam to engage the other side. You know, I've spoke to South Vietnamese soldiers, I spoke to American soldiers, but now I want to speak to the Viet Cong. You know, I want to understand who they were and why they fought. I want to speak to the North Vietnamese. Because again, in watching these movies, not even documentaries, these dramas, practically every drama I'm watching, and if you guys are researchers in history and you want to understand the Vietnam War, please go to YouTube. There are so many dramas about the war in Vietnam from their side. You have a mother who's about to send her son off the war, but before he goes off the war, she wants him to give her a grandson. So you see her here, he's on the front lines, but she's there with a young girl who she wants him to impregnate because she knows he may not be coming back. What blew me away to see the young women that were fighting alongside the men, and then to see the love and the fear. So lately, I said, like these past few weeks, I've been really on YouTube looking at a lot of these stories because I've seen all the platoons and all that, but I want to understand who they were. You know, why were they called gooks? You know, why were they, you know, why did that war happen the way it did? What happened in Way City? There's so many questions that I have, and I have to just continue to do my research, and it's just something that's heavily with me for some reason. I can't let it go. You know, again, the despair and homelessness that I saw. The richest country in the world, but yet we see this here. And this is very important. You know, I want to create images that said something. You have the sign, Mourn the Sickness. The original version of this photograph, those that know Keith Haring, there's a larger, his piece is off to the side. You can't see in this crop version. But you have the statement, if it concerns you, it concerns us. And you have other graffiti, you know, up there that's very derogatory. But I want to create images that make statements. I was in Harlem one day, and I thought this was really ironic when you have a young man with a paper that says Merchants of Death, and right behind him you have an older gentleman who fell victim to alcoholism. And from what I understand, the young boy himself would go on to fall victim to addiction. This is a photograph that was all too common when I worked in the jail system. You know, very painful for me. I would always extend as much courtesy as I could to the attorneys to talk to their clients. That one particular cell was very popular in my area, which I would use as a cell to allow prisoners to pray, to read, to use the bathroom to escape. It's very rare you have a cell like that, because this is a court pen. And oftentimes, within a court pen, you have a cell that houses about 30 to 40 inmates with one toilet. And a lot of officers are very insensitive. They didn't care. As far as they were concerned, you was an inmate, you're nothing but a dirt bag, so they didn't care if you in there and you had to defecate in the presence of 30 people going to court. They didn't care. For me, I had to be empathetic. So this, when I look at not only this photograph, it just brings back a lot of memories because I spent 10 years working in this particular area here, which is actually a mental health area. And I would always bring particular inmates into this one cell who had potential. And I would use this cell to kind of like give them a sense of guidance and direction. And even you see the brooms off to the side, oftentimes too, I would have them sweep the area rather than be confined to a cell. Give them something to do, because it was very troubling for me to see people I knew or people with potential being confined into a cell area. This is the photograph I took of a severely mentally ill inmate. What happened in the 1980s, a lot of mental institutions closed throughout New York City. And what was happening, a lot of the mentally ill were now placed into jails. Rather than get the rehabilitation and help, they cut the facilities. So now you have people who are suffering from different forms of mental illness who might be speaking themselves. They may be suffering from Tourette's. They may be bipolar. Nobody cared. The idea was to lock them up. For those in law enforcement, you lock them up, that's overtime. It's more money, but where's the empathy at? And it was very tragic for me to see so many men. It's like, what happened to these young men? And some of them I couldn't really save. I hated giving them medication. Even the food was terrible. You had the red Kool-Aid, you had bologna sandwiches. It was horrible. And it just made the situation even worse. So this is just a photograph that just represents my vision. And almost like a nightmare. Brotherhood was very important to me, to capture friendship. You know, we see the hate, you know, the screw faces and all that. I wanted to capture men as men, you know, showing each other love. A photograph I saw in one of my travels one day, you know, and you have a lot going on there. I can call this visual poetry. This is one of my most important photographs here. I made this in Montreal during a workshop. And it was very interesting because I'm there conducting this workshop here, and these two children, they just started going through this motion right here, and I was just captivated behind the scenes. It's almost like it was a gift to me, you know, and I call it hope and promise, you know, and just the innocence of children, you know, something that we need in this world today with all the hate that's going on. I realized that as a photographer, I have a purpose, especially now, because, you know, I shared earlier the images that helped to shape my vision. Now I'm clear on what my purpose is as a photographer. This photograph, to me, represents visual medicine. It represents hope and possibility. And it's something that we need to see now to stimulate us and make us feel good. And we need it more now than ever before because as a larger society, we are divided. You know, and I think that the role of photographers could bring about change. I was greatly inspired by Harry Belafonte. And he constantly speaks about the role of the artists, how artists are gatekeepers. And that message really resonates with me. So at this stage in my life, I've been retired now for 15 years, and now I'm in a position to use my voice and various platforms to speak about the need to come together as a society and how we could use images to convey messages of hope and promise. And I'm duty-bound to do that right now because I'm really troubled behind the war, the world. I want to include pictures that I've seen from Yemen and Myanmar and you know, Darfur. And here it is, you know, for me, all these years later, we are still dealing with war, we are still dealing with hatred, we are dealing with poverty. It's very troubling. So it's the artist community that could make a difference in the world. And we need all hands on deck right now. It's so much work that has to be done. And I really believe it's that universal language of art that can make a difference. So I'm calling on all artists and poets and musicians and whatever you could do, whatever type of creative gift that you have, let us use our gift to try to make this world a better place because I've never seen things like this in my life. It just seems like it's getting worse and worse. I'm looking at the fires on the West Coast. I'm looking at the floods. I'm looking at the mass shootings. Something has drastically gone wrong. And we have to come together as society to make a change. That's why I'm so honored to be in your presence today because I'm in a position to have a conversation and share what's in my heart. I'm not trying to be self-righteous. I'm not trying to be preachy. I'm just sharing my particular journey with you. I don't really even consider myself a photographer anymore. I'm just freezing moments and times in hopes that I can contribute in some way to preserving history and culture, making a difference. Perhaps my work might inspire someone to pick up the camera and pick up a camera not only to just create images, but pick up the camera and inspire someone. This is a very interesting photograph here, and I very rarely ever show a picture of myself, but my wife took this, I believe, last year when I discovered the name of Sam White, who died in Vietnam. So I went to the Vietnam Memorial, and I've been holding his memory in my mind for so long about how he died in Vietnam. I was a young child, and so many people in my community remember that dreadful day. So I felt I needed closure. So my wife and I, we went to the memorial in Washington, D.C., and I discovered his name. And not only did she photograph me, document that, but she videotaped me and my emotion and what I felt to finally bring closure to this man I never even met. Going back to chess, you know, it is my goal to try to encourage this next generation to understand that you have to make the right decisions. You have to understand sacrifices. You have to take time to be analytical because you're going to inherit this world and it's going to be a very troubling, dangerous time. So chess is still, you know, that tool in which I use to try to guide people. And this is one of my most important photographs here, given to me by an angel. And what's so powerful about this photograph for me is that I took it earlier this year, and it was a photographer who was right by this photograph. And he saw me, and he called me over, and he pointed this picture to me. He didn't take it. He had the camera. He had everything. But he called me over, and he pointed this young girl to me, and he says, I want you to take this. And I want to end this conversation on this photograph here, because what this represents to me is the harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. And we have to work hard to make the world a better place for this generation. And here you have this young, precious, innocent child in this day and time, in this era of so much hatred and discord. But she represents hope. But she's by herself right now. You know, and we just need all hands on deck right now. So I just felt it was very important. It's funny because in my initial PowerPoint presentation, this wasn't included. And I told my good friend here, Natalie, that I have to get this picture included because this is the way I have to close this conversation. Hope and promise. So I didn't want to be too long-winded with you, but I'm just sharing a few seconds of my life. And thank you so much for coming out. And it's so complicated to kind of like condense all of that because there's so much. There's things I left out, but I didn't want to be long-winded. I'm kind of exhausted in terms of, you know, I just don't want to be, I want to be a student. I want to sit back and kind of like listen these days. So I kind of like gave you guys a short version, but just seconds of my life, pieces of a man, and all of them really relate to who I am today. You know, I stand on the shoulders of so many great people. I could not have done this by myself. A lot of angels have guided me along the path. I'm very grateful for Gordon Parks. And I've got to mention, you know, and I'll be very brief here, I was introduced to the work of Gordon Parks when I was in Germany by reading his son's diary called GI Diary. And what Gordon did, Gordon gave his son a diary. And he told him to take pictures in Vietnam. And that really, it's through that book that I was introduced to Gordon Parks. And it helped me to better understand the struggle of a black man in Vietnam during that time. So I wanted to share that. Thank you again.
So again, thank you very much for speaking. We're going to begin the Q&A now. And just as a quick reminder, we will come to you with a microphone as this is being recorded. Jamel will pick from the audience who speaks, and we will come to you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the speech. Hopefully nobody's buried in that sand and she isn't planting a flower over some. My question is, are you related to Malcolm X? If so, how?
No, I'm not. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming here and speaking. That was amazing.
Thank you very much.
And as a young photographer myself, is there any advice that you have to give this new generation of photographers going forward?
I think it's important to shoot issues that are very close to your heart. Whatever you feel. It might be something you feel that needs to be addressed. It might be a situation you feel is not being addressed. So tackle it. You know, you might be disturbed by homelessness. Go after that. But document. Use your camera, your voice, to make the world a better place. How can you create images that can inspire love in a society full of so much hate? That's what I would say. And the key for me has been to carry your camera everywhere you go. I've been carrying my camera for over 40 years constantly. It's always with me. I'm always looking. I'm always seeking to create and freeze moments in time. But my desire is just to freeze moments, to use my gift of vision. I forgot to mention, normally I always say when I start, I'm just grateful for having this divine gift of vision. And with it, I feel I have a responsibility to create images that will inspire. So that's what I'll say to you, create images that inspire. Yes. Oh, no questions, okay. I'll take them all. Yes, yes, Complex.
You recently got to do, a shoot with Dapper Dan
Yes.
and Naomi Campbell.
Yes.
What's it like, I guess, now that, like, for instance, kind of like you and Dapper Dan in some ways are in the same structure, like he's finally getting recognition for the stuff he's done, and you've been around to document that. What was that like, kind of, I guess, coming full circle to be able to, like, represent him in a more mainstream way than he was normally given the credit for?
That is such a good question, because when I met Dapper Dan, he told me, before you take my photograph, I want you to have a conversation with me. And he says, when we speak, you're going to look at me very differently. Many people know Dapper Dan as this designer of clothes. But when I spoke to him, I met Dapper Dan, the conscious man, the man who was concerned with his community, the man who had traveled extensively trying to improve his community. So after we spoke, I decided that I would photograph him for Essence Magazine, holding a stack of books. And I wanted to photograph him as a scholar. So it was a very incredible relationship in meeting Dapper Dan because we became friends. And now in our friendship, we will be doing collaborations. I was just recently at a basketball game with him that another friend didn't even know that we knew each other, brought us together because he felt that if me and Dapper Dan came together collectively, we could create some magic. So that's a very good question that you presented. So what I did in that campaign, I shot him with his books, Represent Dignity and Scholarship.
Were you also there on the video shoot for like French and Drake and all that kind of stuff?
No, I wasn't.
No, okay.
No, I wasn't. Okay. All right. Questions? I'll take anybody. This is freestyle. Anybody. So good to see you. All right. Yes.
You're a very eloquent speaker. This was beautiful. You mentioned that you had trouble expressing yourself when you were a child.
Yes.
And what process did you go through to get to this stage, I guess?
Wow, that's
public speaking.
That's such a great question because I couldn't speak probably up until maybe I was 20, and I struggled with it. You know, nobody really knew that. I stuttered bad, and to the point where I was ashamed to speak. So I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. I think in my meditation and my clarity on purpose, I started to develop a voice. But for a long time, I had trouble speaking. And I can't believe it. Even when I confronted a lot of my subjects to take their photographs, I would get caught up on words. And sometimes in my mind, the word couldn't come out, and I wouldn't get the photograph. But maybe my photography helped me, because if I wanted those images bad enough, I had to engage people in conversation, and it just faded away. But through my childhood, I had difficulty speaking. I could never really express myself, so no one really knew what was on my mind. So I really appreciate that question, because I struggled with that heavily. And that's why I think that I became so devoted into reading, because reading fed me, and it was just a private exchange I had. I didn't have to really talk to people. But I think I've gotten past it now. Very rarely do I even stumble on words like that now. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. I can't go home until I answer every question, because I feel like there's a lot of pieces missed out. And I need y'all on my Instagram page, too, because my Instagram feed really is a reflection of my heart, and it's through Instagram and social media in which I attempt to convey what's really what I feel inside. Yes, sir.
I remember living right by Washington Square Park, kind of when Eugene Richards was photographing the crack epidemic, and Dinkins was still mayor back then. There was Washington Square Park to be gunfire 3 nights a week.
Yes.
Now, thinking of the destruction, seeing it on the ground back then, what are your thoughts now with what's happening with the opioid situation?
It's all bad, because before there was crack, there was heroin. So we've been dealing with these epidemics forever. And what's happened is that there's a lot of people suffering. There's a lot of people in pain. And I think that with crack, with heroin, with crack, with opioids, people are suffering. So this is self-medication. We have a lot of suffering going on in the world. We don't know the trauma. In my experience in the jail system, and I started to read one, because practically back in the 80s, practically everyone that got arrested for criminal possession of a controlled substance. And it was always trouble. It was troubling. But when you rewind their life, no mother, no father, some type of trauma happened in their life and they never got healed. So there's a lot of people that need some type of organic healing. And I think that's one of the causes of this epidemic, in addition to all the violence that we're seeing. In America, with President Trump in power, it's caused a lot of people to go into a depression. Some of the things that we see on TV constantly, it could depress you. If you're watching the TV and you're seeing the mass killings and the lying and all the deception, it could depress you. So sometimes people use drugs as a form of self-medication to help heal. And then you got so many people dealing with childhood trauma. When I meet so many young people and I go back, I find that they might have been raped, they might have been abused, they might have been bullied, and they never got the help. So as time goes on, you self-medicate yourself because you're still struggling. I struggled for a long time. My experience working in jail, it put me through some very difficult hardships. So I really get it, because I went through a really bad stage in my life trying to process all the hate and the violence that I went through. And I had to get my balance back. Luckily, I had the ocean, I had music, and I had a wife that gave me balance. But some people don't have that. You think about the people who are growing up in foster care. We don't even talk about that, foster care. You know, forced incarceration. I know so many men that have been locked up for crimes they didn't do. 20 years. One man in particular, he was locked up for 20 years for killing his mother and sister. Imagine, killing your mother and sister. You do 20 years and you found innocent because the cop lied. So now you're in prison. Now your mother and sister are murdered. You can't go to the funeral, and you accused of killing them. You do 20 years. So you hear about these stories. And that's what you got, the opiates, and you got suicide, because suicide is high now. So some try to self-medicate to deal with the internal problem. Some can't even self-medicate no more, so they end up killing themselves. So a lot of it is due to the scars that we carry, and we never got healed. So we need more healers now. We need that balance. So before you start to pick up the pipe, you need someone to talk to. Because I found when my friend, who I was in the service with, fell victim to crack, I had to get him back. And the way I got him back, I took him out to the ocean, and we had to rewind. We had to go back to what was that trauma. And we went back. I was able to find out that the trauma was when his father died, he never was able to heal from that. So we had to repair that. And we was able to repair it and look back at the good points in our life. We were able to get past it. But if you're going through depression, which so many people are, it's easy to fall victim to that. So I'm troubled behind it all. Because I spoke to a young man, another recipient of the Gordon Parks Award, Devin Allen, and he talks about the opiate epidemic in Baltimore and how so many people in that particular town are falling victim to it. And it's terrible. And it's bad because the drug companies are pushing it. You know, so I don't know what to say. No, it's just very troubling. But we need all hands on deck to kind of heal people, because so many people are going through situations. What can we do as a society to kind of help people to get past that? So we need volunteers. We need to teach people meditation and yoga rather than using drugs. I've been dealing with this all my life. You know, my uncle was addicted to drugs, you know, and I watched what it did to him. Again, in the military, I watched guys ODing over there all the time. So we just need people to lend their voices and try to combat this right here. I think people need individuals to talk to. Yes. Yes, sir.
Jamel, one of the things that struck me about the way you described the beginnings of your photography was that you talked about how you would always be engaging the people you were photographing.
Yes.
And, you know, obviously, the history of photography in the streets is very complicated. There's lots of different approaches. But historically, people tend to think about street photographers as making pictures where they're almost hiding behind the camera, and reality's happening like an image in front of them, and they take the picture and they move on. That's sort of a kind of a mythology that we have around street photography. What I want to know is, were you like that from the beginning, from the first moment you were out in the streets with your camera? Were you engaging people naturally, having conversations as an integral part of what you were doing, or did that develop over time?
That was a cornerstone. When I first picked up a camera at 15 in junior high school, I needed a voice. Again, I studied, so I think the camera was like a microphone for me. So it allowed me the opportunity to communicate with people. And I always asked. I wanted to know, because I believed in angels. I believe that in my travels, I'm meeting people in life for a particular reason. So when I cross paths with you, not only do I want to freeze that moment in time, but I want to know a little bit who you are. And I want to be respectful and tell you who I am, to let you know that we met on this path for a reason. And I still believe that to this very day, that we meet for a reason. So I look with it. It's like when I look through this viewfinder, it's like I have the ability to see through a third eye. And I'm seeing something in people that others may not see. I'm seeing the beauty. I'm seeing your essence. So I want to know, why did we meet? And believe it or not, so many people I photographed, I'm friends with to this very day, based off taking the time to meet them. I've watched photographers take pictures. I even had a friend that would just take pictures of people, and if he's challenged, he said, well, it's my camera. It's my film. What's the beef? I don't want conflict. I want to engage you. I want to know who you are. I want to try to encourage you. A lot of times I would speak to young people and say, what are your plans for the future? It wasn't about just the photograph. For me, it was about a visual diary of the people I met throughout my life. There's certain aspects of my work that's documentary photography, but there's another aspect, it's just a visual diary. I want to meet people to learn. I want to have a better understanding. Going back to Marvin Gaye's song, what's going on and what's happening, brother, I want to know. So oftentimes that was playing in my head when I approached you. I want to know what's going on. And I want to have that respect. I always gave my business card. I always wanted to pass on a photograph. And then sometimes we would meet, they just want to talk. You know, when can I get my picture? Now we have a friendship going. I can't imagine, so many people I've met based off taking these photographs. So it's always been the cornerstone of my work. And And I do documentary now where I might see a situation to take a picture, but overall, there's a balance too, because you'll see some that are unposed and some that are posed and personal. But there's something about having that connection and shaking that person's hand and looking them in the eye and even giving them a hug. Because even in certain situations, I find that people might need a hug. They might say, you know what, I needed that. No one ever wanted to take my picture before, but I want to take your picture. Why? Because I see greatness in you. I see something special inside you. And that's what made me feel good, that I'm in a position now to plant a seed and move on. I just want to just take the picture. That's easy. You take the picture, you just move on. But for me, to plant a seed, to shake your hand, to embrace you, I felt like I did my job now. I felt like I did my service. And to feel that embrace and that warmth, that was completion for me. So I appreciate that question. Yes.
So, Mr. Jamel Shabazz, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Presentation. I just want to know, what are your future plans for the work that you have? Are you moving in? Are you writing? Are you doing anything creative in that respect?
That's a great question. One of the key things, well, the first thing I'm doing now, I'm working on myself. That's number one. I'm working on becoming a man of better character. That's number one for me. Trying to be a better person, a better human being. That's one. Second, I feel that I've been given this divine gift of vision for a reason. So my work doesn't belong to me, it belongs to institutions. So I feel that what I've captured, it has to be secured. So I look forward to having my work in important collections so the legacy can live on, because it's bigger than me. And then second, what I'm striving to do now, in the spirit of Gordon Parks, who has inspired me, he has set the path that I want to be on. I want to do films. Right now I'm developing a story called A Time Before Crack. It's one thing to be in front of you to attempt to talk about it, but what I want to do is take my book, A Time Before Crack, and take all those characters and bring it to light and help people understand how life was before crack hit. To help people understand the owner of the barbershop was a World War II veteran and how he lost his daughter. But I want to do movies right now. So I'm developing a mini-series for a cable network right now called The Time Before Crack. And I'm also developing a movie entitled, a mini-series called The Room that deals with military life in Germany back in the 1970s. So I want to write now. I want to go into my diaries and I want to recreate, because I wrote, just like I took photographs, I wrote all the time. I have 40 years worth of journals and very important stories in which I want to convey. I want to write plays. I grew up in the theater. So I want to do plays right now. I want to take the creativity to the next level. Like Gordon did photography, he went on to film, he did music. I want to do all of that right now. I'm blessed at this point to work on a movie set with Forrest Whitaker in a movie called Godfather of Harlem. And this has been a great joy for me because the movie is set in 1963 in Harlem. And I've been asked to be the set photographer to document that. And it's been an incredible experience. So right now I'm looking to do films. And I think that's very important right now to help with the healing process. There's a lot of negative films out there, and I feel that I have the ability to use my experience to create something that's positive that's going to help us heal in the society. So I think that my movie, A Time Before Crack, which would deal with families and structure and love, there would be no violence. It's about family and unity and friendship. That would mean the world to me. If I can complete that, I think I would have fulfilled my mission. So I appreciate your question.
I think just in the interest of time, we'll do one more.
Okay. I'll let you pick then. I'll put that on you. I can't do it. I can't. I'm sorry. All right. Who got a good question?
Shabazz.
Who got a 3-point question?
I got the last question. Look at that.
I'll talk with everybody else outside. Or you can DM me. Yes.
Again, thank you for your talk. And I was struck by your emphasis on research and your curiosity and the time you spent in the library. And that seems to be a thread that's continued, that you are always looking to find out more.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what advice you would give to emerging artists and curators and just young people, especially young black men and women coming up, about how to, the Baptist in me will quote the Bible, it says, study to show yourself approved, just the importance of that research in stepping into the world as an artist.
Research is so important for me. No one really realizes that. You know, I love going to the libraries and the bookstores. In my journeys, I always went, and I'm looking at the photography section, I'm looking at history too. I have a massive book collection that means a lot to me to help me better understand what's going on. But I think it's important to understand history because there's a lot that we don't know. I mean, I have stacks of New York Times in my house now that I can't read because they are so full of information and things that are going on around the world. I think a lot of us don't have a clue on what's going on. Things are very critical out here, both locally and internationally. So it's very important that we get a sense of what's going on and watch the news and pay attention because it's just a very critical time. I mean, I just can't believe what's happening in terms of so much. You know, the Flint water crisis, the police shooting, it's a lot. And some people just, we're closed-minded because we're distracted now. Technology has distracted us. I flip it. Now, what I could do, now I love Google. I can Google information. I can go on YouTube and continue my research, so it's all there. But we can't allow ourselves to be distracted. And there's a lot of important issues that matter, and I think we have to use our voices right now. One of the things doing my prayers and meditation, I want to know what my purpose is in life. So I think it's a very important question to ask yourself. What is your purpose in life? What is your legacy? What type of legacy do you want to leave behind? Do you just exist? It's like I should ask young people, what are your plans for the future? We have to raise those questions. You know, do you want to make a difference and make this world a better place? Are you troubled behind what you see? If in fact you are, what can you do to make this world a better place? Starting with your family first. So I'll say to them, we have to challenge each other right now. What concerns you? Everybody, regardless of race, color, or creed, what concerns you right now? How can we make this world a better place? So that's how I challenge everybody. I always end like that again. The harvest is right, the laborers are few. So for them young people coming up, do your research and see what's going on. Understand that we have a lot of problems going on right now, and we can make a difference. One person can make a difference. I mean, I look at the genius of Martin Luther King. This man was in his 20s and 30s. He was a scholar early on. He was compassionate. He didn't have to go that route and speak the way that he did, but he found his call and he did that. We need more people to raise their voices right now because there's so much work that needs to be done out there, a lot of pain. But research is important to me. I'm doing it every day, and the more I do, the more trouble, the more pain I am because I'm so bothered by the things I'm seeing right now. It's like, damn, can it get worse? I mean, I've been reading the New York Times for like 35 years right now, and page after page after page is like misery. But we need solutions right now. I still can't believe that we live in 2018, there's genocide going on around the world. I'm looking at mass rapes and what's happening in Yemen and Syria, all over. We have to find solutions. We have to raise our voices up like never before. So I say to young people, do your research, but try to define what your purpose is. Look in the mirror and say, what is my purpose in life? How can I make this world a better place? It's not a bad question. You know, we could talk about where to party at and where we can get food at, but what about trying to make the world a better place? I challenge you. How can we make, before we start with the world, how can we make our community a better place? How can we make ourselves a better person? You know, and we all can make a difference. Everyone can make a difference. And I believe in that mantra, each one must teach one. But on another note, you can reach out to me on Instagram. I'll welcome you. I'm not in no rush to leave. I walk slow. But I appreciate you all. Like I said, this is something I try to stay away from these days. I don't really like speaking to crowds anymore. I let my Instagram feed speak for me. It's simply just Jamel Shabazz. Somebody help you, but it's there. But I thank you all for coming out. I appreciate you so much. I went through this really fast. I skipped over a very important part of my youth. But like I said, let's stay connected. I'm going to come back here. This city is very close to my heart. I appreciate each and every one of you. I thank all the staff and all the everyone for just coming out and helping to make this day very special for me. Thank you.
We would once again like to thank Jamel Shabazz for coming. We would also like to thank the Ryerson Image Centre and the Tannenbaum Lecture Series for collaborating with us. Our next talk, for those of you who are interested, will be exactly a week from now on November 21st. And the speaker will be Dr. Jacqueline Ottman, Professor and Vice Provost of Indigenous Engagement at the University of Saskatchewan. On behalf of the IID team, we would like to thank you all for coming out. And if you would like more about the IID, you can find us on Facebook at International Issues Discussion Series or on Twitter at IID Series.